Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the foXnoMad podcast. I'm your host, foXnoMad Abu Polat. My guest today is Farhal Ahmad. He is Muslim Aid's digital marketing coordinator. He's here to talk about what aid work is like, how you coordinate logistically when there's a disaster, how relief work is provided. We talked today specifically about Morocco, which is about a month since its devastating earthquake. We want to talk about what it was like, what the phases of recovery looks like. And I think you're going to find a really interesting episode. We talk about ways that you and I can help in relief efforts like this. And I hope you enjoy this episode with Farhal Ahmed. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. I have been really, like, before I hit record, we were talking about, the Morocco earthquake. When it happened was September 8th, right? And I looked it up. I thought it had been months and months ago. And it seems like, I mean, it's not even been a full month that these things drop off the headlines, and that there's this long period of recovery ahead. Can you talk a little bit about, the earthquake happens here? What are the next responses, for example, like an organization like Muslim Aid?
Yeah, so we actually work in phases. So the initial phase is the emergency response. So our team goes onto the ground, sees what the initial needs are of the areas that have been affected, and then from that we then ensure that we are able to get those two areas and provide them with whatever the initial need is, the aid that they need. Whether so, for in the case of Morocco, the initial need was food and medical aid. So in first phase, we provided food. Then we went back in second phase, looking into what is the next process, what is the next need, what is it that they still need. Okay, the next stage that we found out was when they still needed more food, especially flour, because flour was one of the main components of their dietary requirements. And on top, they needed shelter equipment such as mattresses and blankets and etc. That unfortunately a lot of the places a lot of people did not have. So that was the second phase, and as we built along, we move into our once we move out of the emergency phase, we look into what is the next phase, which is the development phase. What are we going to do in order to ensure that all the needs of these communities are met, to ensure that they are back into how they were before, and they are thriving within their own communities. And one of the main things that we saw was shelter. Every community that you went into, they said, we need shelter. Especially what a lot of people do not realize is that the earthquake did not happen in Marrakesh. It happened in the mountains. In the epicenter was in the mountains, and although during the beginnings there was a lot of news that it was in the epicenter was in the mountains, but Marrakesh was affected. But it was not actually Marrakesh that was really affected. It was those villages that are within the mountain. The Atlas Mountain has a lot of villages within itself. These villages are very deep within the mountains. One village that we went to, when we spoke to them, we said, "Why don't you leave this area? It's you've got a lot of your houses are destroyed. You can move." And they were like, "We've been here for 480 years. How can we leave our home? We don't know how to get out of here. Where are we gonna go? This is where we live. This is where all we know." So for a lot of these villages, they're not there for they haven't been here for let's say 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. They've been there for years, hundreds and hundreds of years, and a lot of them have lost their houses, completely shattered. I remember we went to one village, and it is a lot of these houses they built on like a little sledge. So you got one house here, then you got another sledge, you got another house at the bottom. So I looked up, we were walking down, and I looked up, and the house, literally half of it was destroyed and half of it wasn't. And I looked down on the other side, that house was completely destroyed. I'm like, how did that happen? And they were like, oh, you see that mountain? There was a massive rock that came, destroyed half of this house, and fell on this house completely and destroyed everything. So these are the situations that we were seeing on the ground. And that's something that we really needed to look into. How can we ensure that we are providing development work for these areas? And one of the main thing was shelter, and Muslim Aid is looking into bringing shelter. Unfortunately, within Morocco, because it's not a disaster-prone country, which is good to know, but it does not have the structure to support a lot of these disasters. So we have to bring in these shelter tents from outside. And something that we are looking into bring is these tents that are made winterization tents. They have 3 layers within itself, so it keeps it nice and warm. It also has metal doors in front of it, windows that are able to see through, and it has in the middle a stove pole where you can put a stove inside the tent, which allows the tent to be warm and also for the families to cook. And these are quite big tents, and easily a family of 4 to 5 can fit in there. So these are the type of tents that we're looking to bring in into Morocco, and to see how we can provide this into those villages as soon as possible.
And it might be a silly question, but for somebody unfamiliar, how do the aid workers, how do you get there? I mean, do you just take a normal flight? And my follow-up question to that is, how do you get the supplies there? What I mean, how do you arrange a flight? Do you have to buy those supplies separately? How does
Yeah,
that work?
it all depends on the country. So if we take Morocco as an example, Morocco is it's not it has a lot of facilities, and it's quite easy access. So we were able to take a flight straight into Marrakesh because Marrakesh wasn't affected, so the flights were still going in and out. And but a lot of tourists didn't know that was the case. So at the beginning, when I took the flight there, it was literally like 30% of the flight was full. It was completely empty. I had like 3 seats here, I had 3 seats there. So the flight was completely empty. So for us to get into the country was quite easy. What we usually do is once we get to the country, beforehand we have a team that is on the ground for the locals. We build a team with our partners that is from the locals that understand the local language, understand the local climate, the geopolitical system, and etc. And once we have that, we go on the ground and implement these projects. We may need to buy if there's the facilities and the country has the requirement equipment and the requirement needed for these areas, we can get those internally. For example, it was easy for us to get flour and other food dietary equipment and on the ground quite easily. So we were able to purchase that. What we do is it's as much as going to a wholesaler and purchasing wholesale equipment, or just bringing something from a food market, etc., and building those food packs depending on what is available, or working with factories, etc. And that's in terms of what's internally. Externally, if there is stuff that is not within the country, you have to look at other avenues, whether you have to fly it in, whether you have to bring in through cargoes, through trucks, etc. Whatever is the best form of bringing the equipment into that area, we will aim to do so. So it's something that no matter what it is, no matter what the situation is, we have to get the aid there, and we aim to do it in however we can do it in the best way form.
And is there I mean, this is my silly question again, but because we see on the news, we see the aid workers after a disaster. Is there like a passport category, or is there some special, or just entering as if you would, enter like as a tourist, for example, but then you do aid work, or is there paperwork you have to fill out? And I suppose it depends, but
Yeah.
what are the arrangements look
Yeah,
like?
yeah. So it does depend on the country. Some countries it's as easy as just getting a flight there. For example, Morocco, it was just get a flight there, and you're quite good to go. Countries such as maybe like Libya, it's a lot more difficult to get into those countries because of the paperwork and the process. You can't just go in on a tourist visa. You need to have the right paperwork done through the government, and also to enter those locations. It may be certain countries you may be able to get into the country, but you cannot get into the locations that are affected, and you may need special passes or special documents to get that through the government in order to get into those areas and help out. So you have to follow those procedures quite regularly and ensure that you're fulfilling all the parts for some countries, while other countries it's as easy as just getting a flight there.
Interesting. And the reason I ask is because a lot of times, like what we see on the news is we see the disaster, and then we see people in these bright reflective jackets usually. That's just what we see. But the logistics of doing all of that in a short time frame, I think, is important to understand, because
Yeah,
that's the initial response. Even that takes some time. But now we talked about this before we hit record, that a lot of the international aid that comes into a place like Morocco, where thousands of people have died, many more are displaced, homeless, or affected, injured, and then a week or two later, a lot of those aid groups go back home. So my question is, why do the groups come in for a shorter period of time? And what happens after that? Like, what does the rebuilding process look like today
yeah,
for you?
yeah. So those groups are mainly emergency response units. So they're quite specific in terms of their job is to come, get everyone out of the rubble, find as many people and save as many people as possible, and provide the initial aid. And once they've done that, then they pretty much leave straight away. The next part is NGOs and the government itself, where they take on the next stage, where it is providing emergency support that they still may need, providing long-term support that they will need. What you have to understand is it's not just physical help in terms of like shelter, food. There's a big psychological effect that earthquakes and these disasters have on people, and this psychosocial help that a lot of people need, and it's in that's part of long-term development work that some NGOs like Muslim Aid are looking into doing for these areas. Because I remember there was this one old lady I was speaking to, and she just like she was saying, "Oh, I couldn't understand initially, but she was sign languaging, and because I don't speak the language, so she was kind of sign languaging to me, and I kind of got the gist of what she's saying. She was saying that, oh, when I sleep, I find it hard to sleep because I feel like it's gonna shake and it's gonna have an earthquake. Even myself, on the first day when I went there, because I was going to these villages and hearing so many stories. When I went back to our hotel and I was sleeping, I kid you not, I woke up thinking I was like about to fall because of an earthquake, because of that psychological effect. And for me, it was just hearing those stories. They lived those stories. So imagine how they would feel.
Yeah, I mean, I again, I go back to what we see on the news, and we see people after an earthquake that are, they've lost their homes, and it almost seems like you just sort of expect, like, like everyone is sad, and they talk to people, but they don't really show that the sort of the PTSD that can happen from just
Yeah,
your home. Just, I mean, I can't even imagine
yeah.
what that would be
Eh,
like.
Another story would be a lady that we visited, and she was we went there, and it was actually a house fallen down, and she was wearing all white, and there was a tap in front of the house, and she was just getting some water from that tap. And as we got to the village, we got out, and one of our colleagues who's from there was like, "You see that woman? She's mourning, because in Morocco, when you wear white, that means that you've lost someone in your family, and you're mourning, usually your husband or your partner." So we were like, okay, that's quite sad. And we went afterwards to speak to her, and we were actually in front of that house where she was getting water, and she goes, "You see this house? It took me and my husband 30 years to build, and it was completely on the ground." And she actually lost her husband that day, and she lost her son, and her daughter was completely injured. She herself was stuck in the house itself, and basically the house had fallen. The husband was on the first floor, she was on the ground floor, and her son was on in his room. And unfortunately, when the house fell, rocks hit her husband on the head, and he was losing a lot of blood. She was she managed to be in a position where she wasn't really hurt in terms of major injuries, but her whole body was crushed, and she had luckily her phone, so she was able to call her son, who was an hour away, and he actually drove for an hour and got her out of that hole. But she was telling us while she was in that hole, she could only hear her husband calling out for help continuously, help, help, help. But she said after a while, she couldn't hear him anymore. And she goes, that's when I realized he had passed away. And she said when they came out of that hole, when she was taken out, um, and they went to check on her son, he was completely crushed. And she was standing there telling us a story with a brave face, and it just showed the resilience of the people in Morocco. And like, she's telling us this story, but she's so brave. There's not a tear that's coming down. She's holding herself, that this is my story, but I'm not gonna cry. I'm gonna stand strong. And these are the stories of many people in these villages, unfortunately.
And when you meet people like this in this situation, as an aid worker, where do you begin? Is it, I mean, you know, that person who's probably living now in temporary shelter, um, I can imagine if I were in their shoes, you're not thinking about the future, right? There's so much that you've lost. But on the other side, how do you plan? Like, I mean, is the goal is, I would imagine, to rebuild everything, right? As the sort
Yeah,
of the ideal. How do what do those steps look like? Those initial steps, once you get somebody
yeah.
past that emergency phase.
Yeah, so it's the next stage is to do a need assessment, see who needs what. For example, you would go to a village, you would do a need assessment of the amount of people in that village, how many houses have been destroyed, who needs a house, etc., etc. So you create a long list of a proposal, a complete need assessment that's been done. Then a proposal is created, which is then sent to our team in the UK, and we then look in that proposal. We look at all the things that needs to be done, and then we phase it out in, okay, this is going to be 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, 2 year. We put it in phases. Once we put it in phases, then we start actioning the work with our partners, making sure that not only that the work is being done, but it's being done with the best due diligence. All the paperwork are being done, and we're ensuring that every single person that is being helped, we know, and we are accountable for those people, and we are aiming, we can showcase that we have helped every single person. So that's a long-term phase that we work on when we go to these natural disaster zones, and when we try to do long-term work there.
And so you're tracking every person, you're saying person A, B, C, let's say they've lost a
Yeah, we have a
house.
list of every single person that we help, the amount of people in those households, uh, what age they are, whether they're female, male, um, the, how many families they may live. Some houses they have more than one family living in there. So we have all that data that we collate, and according to that, we provide them with support. So of course, these are all confidential data that we don't share with public, but it is more of for ensuring that we are able to provide support to every single beneficiary.
And how does at this phase, I would imagine you're calculating is budgeting or trying to figure
Yeah.
out how much it's going to cost. How do the finances work? Like how does the money come in, and how do you plan to distribute it?
Yeah, so then we work closely with our finance and marketing team. So initially, whatever we have in terms of a set budget. So this is why it's so important to raise money for our global emergency and needed greatest pots. So we have different pots. So you have your needed greatest, which is basically all projects that we can use that fund for. You have your global emergency, which we can use for our emergency projects, and you have your thematic, water, child sponsorship, etc. And for me, needed greatest and global emergency is one of the most important pots of funding for any charity, and it's something that I always urge people to donate towards, because using these pots, we are able to quickly get funds out to these areas and provide initial support, because they are not restricted to a country or cause. We can quickly get them out and get the help that these people need as soon as possible. Then once we've got that stage sorted, we then go to our marketing team and our fundraising team, and we say, okay, these are the projects, this is how much we need, how much of this can you think we can fundraise for, and how long do we think? Then they create their plan, and then we work together to streamline this and ensure that we are raising funds throughout the time period that we've allocated, and at the same time, then going out and implementing all the projects.
And this sounds depressing to say, but there are a lot of disasters around the world, a lot of problems.
Unfortunately, yeah.
How do you, pick and choose? I mean, there must be things or events that maybe don't get the priority, or perhaps, can't be logistically done, or, what is the selection
Yeah.
process like?
I don't think there's much of a selection process. It's just an emergency is an emergency, and we don't say no, this emergency we can't help. It's wherever we can help, we try our best to get there. But you're right. There's so many emergencies, and unfortunately, you're not able to get to all of them. So initially, our initial requirement is always, can we get to this area? Do we have our own office in the country, or can we get a partner on the ground as soon as possible to respond to this emergency? And if we are able to meet these requirements and are able to get a partner on board, because even getting a partner on board to do this, there's a lot of due diligence work, there's a lot of risk assessment, a lot of paperwork that goes on behind that. And it's like, imagine a month's work being done in like a day or two. So it's super hectic. Our colleagues are working literally 24 hours for like, or 48 hours straight. Um, Making sure that we are getting these approved. And if we are able to get them approved, then we can literally go out straight away and start implementing our projects and helping out and providing aid to these emergency disaster prone areas. But yeah, that's it's difficult to get to all these areas, unfortunately.
Yeah, but it is also amazing that there is so much aid work that does occur. It sort of brings out the best in people in the worst of times. It really, the cliche is very true. You do see people when
Yeah,
you see aid workers, emergency workers fly to a country they maybe have never been to. They don't know where they're going, and putting themselves at risk, right? Like, I mean, when you go to these places, you're at risk of injury because of the structures. There's disease, all kinds of things that you're exposed to. Um, what is Morocco like now? I mean, the earthquake hit areas, and we're now 1 month out. Uh, what does it look like on the ground?
so in terms of the areas that have been affected, for them, I think, like you said, it's they're not even thinking long term. It's about, when is the next food? Are we going to have enough food for the next week? When are we going to get out to shelter home? I think that there's certain things that we take so much for granted, as simple as going to a toilet. Like, they've got shelter, but where are they going to go toilet? It's things as simple as that that we take for granted, that a lot of these people are thinking about right now, that we wouldn't even think about. Like, where am I going to have shower? Like, how am I going to cook? Like, these are things we're like, it doesn't even comprehend in our head when we think about emergencies. But these are the daily struggles that people are going towards. Like, a female does not have the sanitary pack that she needs. And unfortunately, she may be starting her menstrual cycle, and she's like, what am I going to do? And these are the type of questions that are the daily questions that these people are looking to answer, and that's what their problems are in this initial stage.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point that we're talking. It's maybe you can imagine for a day or two or three, but when we get 1 month, 2 months out, you know, really that there's sort of this less glamorous kind of the grind that of solutions
Yep.
that you have to come up to the problems. Do you? I mean, I guess having experience with these different types of disasters, is there a timeline for a place like Morocco? Do we do you look at it like, okay, we estimate in about 6 months we should be here, and 12 months, 80% of the people are sheltered, or what do the
Yeah.
long-term plans sort of look like?
So yeah, it does depend largely on the government itself, in terms of, because a lot the government itself is looking to do a lot of work within these areas. So it all depends on what the plans for the government is, and according to that, then we can make sure that then we can put our timeline as well. Okay, if this is what the government's doing and this is what we're doing, we estimate that we are going to be able to fulfill our projects within this time frame. But at the moment, it's still in that process of analyzing and collating the data on the ground and seeing what the needs is, and just make sure that we are able to meet that goal in the next year or 6 months.
And is there a point where you get to that you can say, everything is done, or that we've accomplished the goal? Do you get that as an aid organization?
Sometimes, yeah, you do. There's we the initial stages, yes, you get your when you're responding to an emergency, you can say you've responded, but there's always so many people that are in need. Even within a country, unfortunately, you can never get to everyone, and I think that's the sad thing, that uh, you can bring millions and millions and millions of pounds and get aid as much as you want, but there's always going to be someone that is left out, unfortunately. And it's not because of anyone's fault, or no one wants to give. It's just the circumstances, the difficulty of the situation. It can be of that case, and sometimes that's the sad reality. But of course, you have your days where you've seen projects that have been completed, and the impact of your work. For example, our projects in Sri Lanka. So where we have, if you go to our project in Sri Lanka, you would when we go ourselves, we're so amazed of what we have achieved in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And the reason for that is because it is an integrated system. The entire project, all of them are integrated. We have a school. Those that go to that school, uh, they get once they finish, they go to a college which is sponsored by us. They get training in those colleges. From that, then they get for workshop. From workshops, they get the tools to go out and make money. From that money, then what they buy is actually what we then use to feed those in those vulnerable areas. So it's an entire system, a cycle that Muslim Aid has created in countries like Sri Lanka because of its long-term work. And that is something that we would like to achieve in every other country that we work in. And that is what we are working towards, long-term development projects where everything is integrated and we are able to support communities, villages, and cities.
And you brought it up before, which is I have sort of a two-part question for you: how the public can help. And from what I understood, correct me if I'm wrong, is that donations to an organization that are not specific to a specific tragedy help, in other words, bolster that available budget you have that can be allocated quickly.
Yeah.
Of course, donating to a specific event cause is not bad, but having those sort of, when times are, I guess, quiet, which is a good thing, those
Yeah.
sort of regular, donations. Is there any, are there other things the public can do that would make your work easier?
Yeah, there's so many things you can do. You can create your fundraising pages, organize events. You can volunteer with us. You can come along if you want to, for example, yourself want to organize an event, call your friends, do a talk show or live podcast, for example, and do a fundraising on the day. Or if you want to, if you're an influencer and you want to do a fundraising page, you can set up a fundraising page. There's so many different avenues, or your society at university, or you are an organization and you want to take part in challenges. We are able to create these projects and these programs and events for you and challenges for you, and then you can take part in them and to raise money for whichever cause that you would like to. So there's so many different ways. And the most simplest way is just to go on our website, muslimaid.org, and donate. But there's so many different ways that you can get involved.
And on the flip side, as the aid organization, if you could, change one thing, I guess, what would be that thing that would make your work easier? You know, I I imagine logistics and it depends on where you are working with different governments. But, is there one thing that you say, if 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 this were the case in a lot of these places, it would make XYZ easier?
That's a good question. I have to think about.
Yeah, it just was thinking.
It's this. Of course, there's a lot of things that would make my life easier. I think communication is probably the biggest. I think just being able to communicate um, with different countries and with different organizations, because there's always, unfortunately, there's a gap in understanding or language, or this disconnect in communication. So if we could, I don't know, somehow streamline the communication throughout everyone, I think that would make everyone's life a lot more easier.
Interesting. Yeah, you brought up something that made me think. So, I would imagine in an ideal world there might be like a department of charity or aid organization or relief in every country that you would contact. That would be the point of contact, kind of. Does something like that exist? I mean, when you're talking to the Moroccan government, who in the government how does that
Yeah.
look like, that communication?
So it's different. It's there's no one organization. Uh, it's either, and it's different case by case depending on the country. There are certain countries you're able to work through the government. There are certain countries where you will need to find on the ground partners who can fulfill these aid projects or any project that you're implementing. So it really depends on the country, and every country is different. You may uh, certain countries you can just work with UN or Red Cross as an example, or you may need to work on with the government. The government has projects and they help you with implementing, and you can work through the government. So it's very different depending on the country and where you are implementing these projects.
So I like to bring it up to the logistics again, because I want sort of, I don't think and I don't think I understand completely how difficult. It's more than just going there and providing food, right?
Yeah,
To do that takes so much behind the scenes that you don't see. That's not, probably
yeah.
not glamorous to.
It's not the most glamorous part of the work, no, but there is a lot of paperwork. You're talking about due diligence, risk assessments, proposals, project lists, uh, if you name it, from even if you're spending £1, we need to know how that pound's going to be spent. If you're working with a partner, we need to know who these partners are, what their credibilities are, what work they've done beforehand, how do they implement their projects. So there is a lot of paperwork that goes behind the scenes in order to just implement, even though you may see us, yeah, we're there in 1 day or 2 days, but that 24 hour, that 48 hour before we got on the ground, no one has slept basically. That's what how it works, unfortunately. In order to get, in order to be able to respond to these areas as quickly as possible.
And I guess recently you've been traveling to many different places, not just Morocco. Can you talk about some of the other places that you visited recently? What's going on there, just to catch us up?
Yeah, so I actually didn't, but my colleague, he went to Turkey during the Turkey earthquake, and he was describing it was, of course, I would say 10, 20 times worse than what we saw in Morocco. In Turkey, it was literally cities completely destroyed. And when I came back, it was interesting because we were just comparing our stories and our experiences. And there's one thing that we both uh, said we wouldn't forget was actually the smell of, unfortunately, dead bodies and dead livestock. Uh, there's a significant smell when you're on the ground that um, literally you can't forget it afterwards, and it sticks in your head. That smell, even when you think about it, it kind of comes. And we were just thinking about that and how that mentally impacts yourself, and just talking about how can we, because we visit quite a lot of countries, and as aid workers it can be very overwhelming when you are seeing these things. So how do you work with that? How do you ensure that you don't go insane and you're not going falling into depression? And it's just, I think one thing that one of our colleagues who was with us this time, and an older colleague who has been in the sector for a very long time, and something that he really did during the trip that really helped was when we are on the ground, when we are helping, when we are in the areas, it's full on, you're in that mode. But once you get into that car and you're driving to the other location, you kind of switch off from it, and you try to, just talk about random things. Anything. We were talking about some weird stuff, just like, you know, brushes and toothpicks and just anything random, just to get your mind off that. Because if once you're in that car and you're alone and you're just thinking about that continuously, because you're going from place to place and you're seeing different stories and different lives, and that really impacts you as an aid worker. So this is something that I would recommend to all our colleagues in the sector, whenever you are on the ground, like, and when you are, of course, on the ground and you're in the work area, of course, you're focused. But the minute you get a chance to just move away from it, just completely shut off from it, just for a couple of minutes, an hour, that will help you a lot in terms of just managing everything on the ground as well, because you don't want to be overwhelmed. At the end of the day, we are responsible of the aid. We are responsible for ensuring that these people get the help that they need. So we need to ensure that we are taking care of ourselves in the best way form.
And you, as you were speaking, it reminded me of a sort of doctors. I've heard stories where they're giving you grave news or something, but the doctor doesn't show much emotion. And I've always thought, that's to keep some sort of protection for themselves, right? Not to get too emotionally involved. Now, on the ground, when you're speaking with people and helping people, there must be a very fine line between being too distant, or do you have to keep a distance, emotionally, from seeing, all of these, bad things, but
Yeah,
also good things. Yeah.
it's it's very difficult. You of course you have to. It's difficult to manage. Like you said, it's a very fine line, because you're dealing with real humans. You're dealing with real emotions, and it's not just emotion of just a small trauma. You're talking about severe emotions of complete loss of everything, of households, of family members, and just speaking to them. And when someone's lost something, and just see the face, it's a very different look. It's very, the eyes are a lot more dark, and and it's hard to describe, but it's very different emotion that you get from them. Even if they are smiling, even if they seem happy, it's a very different form of happiness, because they inside them you can feel that sorrow, that pain, and it's difficult to not feel some of it, and you have to just maintain that. And like I said, it goes back to when you're there, of course you're going to feel the emotions, you're going to feel their pain, the pain of the community. But once you're out of that, try to distance yourself from that pain, and try to just distance yourself from what is going on, just for a while, just for a couple of minutes, just for half an hour, so you can mentally come back to your sane spot, and you can re-energize yourself, because you're going to be heading to another village in an hour or so. So you need to be mentally prepared for that. So it's just that, mental preparation for yourself.
And to round things up, I think, obviously the work you do is very important, and it focuses a lot on tragedy, but also, I see the good side of, we see people flying around the world to help other people, which I think is good, and something that we don't see a lot of in the news. We tend to focus on the negative, right? And Is there a story or experience or just overall feeling you could share? Maybe something positive or something unusual that happened. You mentioned the woman before and her resilience. I'm sure you have lots of different stories along those lines.
Yeah, I'll tell you one story of actually one of my colleagues. He told me of what he experienced a couple of days before I landed, and he said that we were, going to the different villages, helping everyone out, and the people of Morocco are very hospitable. They always want to, welcome you into their homes, even if they have nothing. And this is actually a story of that. It was actually a man who came to one of our colleagues, and he said, "Oh, come eat with us." And he was like, "It's okay." He goes, "No, no, no, come." And he's taking him, and then once he got there, he realized that the man was not in a shelter. He did not have a home or any sort of tent or anything. His home was actually under an olive tree. His family was staying under an olive tree, and the olive tree was the shade, and the hospitality and just the sheer joy of someone coming and helping. He was welcoming him, even though that was all he had. And he was like, "Look, even though the food that we gave them," he was like, "Oh, I'll cook and then we can eat." And my colleague's like, "No, I can't do that. This is for you." But it's these stories that you see, like, they may have nothing, but they have a heart of that had a heart of gold, and the heart is full of welcoming, and they are so open in terms of just bringing you in and accepting you. Even if you were to give them one morsel, they will be happy, and they will be like, "Let's share this." That is the stories that you see a lot when you go on the ground, like the humble experience that these people, they may have nothing, but they they will give you everything gladly, just because you help them a little. And this is across the world. Wherever we go, we hear these stories and we see these stories.
Wow. Well, it's amazing. And a great way to sort of wrap this up. I like I said, I think, the work you do is very admirable, honorable, difficult. Again, the paperwork stuff, I just think even those things which take so many hours, it's so tedious probably, just to get those things done. But you see people that still have hope, I guess, which is kind of the takeaway. They've lost so much, but still have something to offer. What are the best ways that people can get in touch with Muslim Aid? How can they help? I'll leave links in the show notes, but what are some of the best
Yeah.
ways they can get in touch?
Yeah, so the best way is to go on our website, muslimaid.org, and we have, if you want to donate, you can donate on any of our pages. We have different causes, or if you would like to get involved by doing any voluntary work or want to organize your event, just go to our Get Involved page. We have the section where you can just fill out a form, and someone from our team will be in touch with you, or you can simply just call us and ask for someone from our fundraising team or someone from our income generation team. You can ask for myself, Farhal Ahmad, and we'll be happy to help you in wherever you are looking to do, whether it's an event, a challenge, etc. Whatever you wish to do, we are able to accommodate for it.
I You've given me some ideas, and hopefully I can contribute in the not too distant future, and
That's good to
hopefully
see.
our listeners as well, and viewers. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think it's just really illuminating. Again, like I said, the Turkey earthquake seems like it was years ago, but
Yeah,
and so there's still a lot of work that's being done. Thank you again for your time. I'll leave links to where everybody can find you in the show notes, and hopefully we'll catch up again sometime. And see how the things have progressed.
definitely. No, thank you for having us. I think it was really insightful. I think a lot of your viewers would enjoy our discussion, and thank you to everyone that has donated or will donate. And thank you as well for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the foXnoMad podcast. I will leave links to where you can find Muslim Aid down in the description box and the show notes below. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'll have new videos for you every week, and I'll see you in the next one.